The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers, and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities. Some interviews heard on this program may be sponsored by the participants. It's time for Health Futures with Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. It is Friday, March 26th. We're coming at you live from the Money Radio Studios, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. If this is the first time you're tuning into this show, our show is about how our older adult population can live a healthier, happier life. And how do they do that? They do that by listening to the show, because I bring extraordinary guests here to the show. We've been on the air for 8 years now. We've done over 400 shows. If you want to check any of them out, go out to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, third button down is radio show, and you can catch all of them right there. So as I said, our show is about the guests that I bring to the show, and I have a great guest here today. It's someone I've known for at least the last 15 years. I had the privilege of serving on the board of this incredible organization that he's the leader and founder of, called the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. I am really proud to have here in the studio with me Dr. Eric Reiman. He's the executive director for the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. He's the CEO of the Banner Research, and he is also the director of the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you for having me, Bob, and thanks for all you've done for our organization and for patients and family caregivers.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the stuff that you're doing as it relates to dementia and Alzheimer's research. You've got a great quote, and I'd love to kick it off, and I'm going to surprise you with it, and that has to do with about generation, right? And when you put the brain, when you formulated the business plan for the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, you had this one quote. Could you please share with our listeners?
Well, our primary research goal has been to find a way to end Alzheimer's without losing a generation. We opened our doors to Banner Alzheimer's Institute in late 2006. If a generation is 20 years, we still have that goal of finding an effective treatment before that time, within the next 5 years, we hope.
Fantastic. And you opened up at the end of 2006, and I know that this was something you were working on for a long time. I would love for you to take our listeners and refresh my memory on how Banner Alzheimer's Institute really came to be.
Well, I'm a psychiatrist and brain imaging researcher by background, and my interest initially was not in Alzheimer's disease. I was interested in developing and using techniques to understand how different parts of the brain work in concert to orchestrate normal behaviors like memory and emotion, and how they conspire to produce behavioral disorders. In around 1990, I was asked for some strange reason to join the board of directors for the local Alzheimer's Association chapter, and I thought it would be nice to show my young kids an investment in the community that had almost nothing to do with my work. And to my embarrassment, even though I am a physician who would occasionally evaluate patients with memory and thinking problems, I had a new understanding of the horrible toll that this disease takes on patients and family caregivers. I had the opportunity to work with some amazing people, and I vowed, starting as a kind of a hobby, to think about what we could do to make a difference in people's lives from a research standpoint and eventually from a clinical care standpoint. What became a hobby became an overwhelming passion. And for many years now, my colleagues and I have been interested in this marriage between research and care, help and hope, to make a difference clinically and indeed to find a prevention therapy before I retire.
I know it's a passion of yours, and you have been a great ambassador, not just here in our great state of Arizona, but throughout the dementia and Alzheimer's research community. And to think that the Banner Alzheimer's Institute started 15 years ago, and how much has been done, and how much you are doing presently. I think about Alzheimer's disease, and I want to, if I can, just have you really explain to our listeners, because everyone thinks of Alzheimer's as the only dementia out there. There's so many different types of dementia, and I've learned so much from you and the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. If you could just take a second and really talk about dementia and the root of dementia and how Alzheimer's is different from some of the other dementias and some of the other research that you're doing as it relates to genetics and lifestyle that really play a role in this disease.
And we only have 3 hours, is that right, to be able to do all that?
About 40 minutes, but who's counting?
Well, thank you. As you know, dementia is the term we use for a disabling impairment in memory and thinking abilities. And there are a number of different medical conditions that could lead to a disabling impairment like this, which affects a person's activities of daily living. There are a number of biological differences among these forms of dementia. Sometimes it affects their clinical course, their rates of decline in memory or other thinking abilities, other associated symptoms. And many of them have recognizable microscopic abnormalities that can be used to make the diagnosis. Alzheimer's disease accounts for about 60% of the dementias in older people. And it is characterized at the end of life, as Dr. Alzheimer first described in 1906, by abnormalities known as amyloid plaques, tau tangles, and we happen to know an associated loss in brain cells and their connections. So there's been a lot of progress now made in this fight against this disease. In the case of Alzheimer's, we see this gradual but relentless decline in a person's memory, their judgment and reasoning, their ability to communicate, to verbalize their thoughts, their ability to perform routine tasks like cooking or dressing themselves. In its later stages, one can develop incontinence, which can be a challenge for patients and family caregivers. They can develop difficulties with their ability to swallow, and malnutrition is one of a number of causes of death. Their ability to control their movements. And it is one of the leading causes of death in older people, and the only cause of death for which we don't have an effective treatment at this time. In addition to those declines in memory and thinking abilities, patients can often develop some other behavioral changes that can be quite distressing for families. Repeating the same thing over and over, hallucinations, paranoid delusions, agitation, other behavioral changes that can be challenging and for which families struggle to know the best way to address these needs. So it's a terrible problem for the affected person. It is an underappreciated problem, one that you know extremely well for family caregivers. About 60% of whom will become clinically depressed, the primary caregivers, and often feeling left in the lurch, exhausted and not knowing where to turn. And it's thought to occur in about 10% of people over the age of 65, somewhere between a third and a half of people over 85. And because in those age groups the numbers continue to grow, this one age-related disorder is going to triple by 2050, and at an overwhelming cost to countries around the world. So we have, for the human toll that it takes today and the projected toll down the road, we have an urgency to find fundamental ways to address this problem. And we have some exciting opportunities to do so sooner than you might think.
It didn't take 3 hours, but that was a real good summation of what we're looking at. But I will say this, one of the things that is wonderful and it's amazing about the Banner Alzheimer's Institute is that you have the care support model as well. you have support groups, and it's not just all about the science. And I think that really makes it much easier for families to be able to talk to someone, talk to their peers, because they feel like they're alone when they're dealing with their loved ones that are trapped in this awful disease. You've been listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Dr. Eric Reiman here in the studio. He's with the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. He's also part of Banner Research. He's the CEO of that, as well as the director of the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. Stick around. We got 3 more segments. 1 down, 3 more to go. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. And if you're just tuning in, we're in our second segment here. I am proud to have in the studio with me Dr. Eric Reiman. He is the executive director of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, CEO of Banner Research, and he's the director of the Alzheimer's, or should I say Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. If you missed the first segment, you can catch it up on our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, third button down is radio show. We really got a chance to really talk about the disease, Alzheimer's, talked a little bit about the early beginnings of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, and really where we left off, Eric, is we talked about support and the fact that you, meaning Banner Alzheimer's, really has a big supportive support system for caregivers. And I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about some of the work that you guys are doing, and also how have you guys pivoted or evolved with the COVID pandemic, and how's that, how have you been able to be supportive of families that are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Bob. Let me begin by saying how lucky we are in Arizona to have such talented professional caregivers in a range of areas, including those involved in the evaluation and management of dementia. As the director of the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium, I have the privilege of working with some terrific people from a number of institutions, our friends at Mayo Clinic, Arizona, Barrow Neurological Institute, the University of Arizona, Banner Alzheimer's Institute, a new Banner Alzheimer's Institute facility we opened during the pandemic in Tucson, and Banner Sun Health Research Institute. When we established Banner Alzheimer's Institute, in addition to our interest in finding an effective prevention therapy as soon as possible, we were also taken by the unmet needs of patients and families. 60% of patients with dementia never have an evaluation in their lifetime. Some of them have potentially reversible problems. An evaluation is an important thing, and some guidance is an important thing. Even when seen by specialists, it's all too common that patients and families are treated under a consultation model in which they have an evaluation, one rules out reversible problems, maybe has access to a medication treatment that might have a little bit of a benefit. But to a large extent, many patients and family caregivers feel left in the lurch. To know how to address the wide range of non-medical issues that the families deal with every single day. So when we set up Banner Alzheimer's Institute, in addition to our prevention goals, we had the idea of trying to provide programs for patients and families and services for the community that we would want as family members ourselves. To not only have a really strong medical clinic, and I'm blessed with the colleagues I have who are doing this every day, who provide the medical care, but a family and community services program to address a wide range of needs, help people know about life after a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, not only coping with one loss after the other, but opportunities to build precious memories and enjoy life along the way. It's not as if one falls off a cliff after a diagnosis. And to provide a range of innovative services that it's one thing to have an idea that we should do that. I've been amazed at what they've been able to put together to address those needs, and I just think it's a difference maker. Eventually, we need to figure out a way where one doesn't have to come to Banner Alzheimer's Institute to get access to that information. Often, right now, many families will reach out, for instance, to the Alzheimer's Association chapter or support information. They will look on the web. They'll look at programs like yours when needed, which it's hard to underscore how valuable they are. But sometimes people just don't know how to navigate these issues. And we need to have a way to make that possible for everybody, to figure out how that starts in the primary care setting. And I do think there are going to be some interesting opportunities. So again, from day one, we were interested in being able to figure out how to address the problem from the research side, but to provide a different kind of care. You might ask why it's not more extensively used. We use a good amount of our own philanthropy to help support that. But eventually, we see opportunities that it can be self-sustaining financially such that it could be done around the country, and there's some exciting developments in that regard. We've offered a range of programs. You and I were talking recently about a program that my former colleague Jan Doherty started that at the time was called the Arts Engagement Initiative, in which we would have a patient and a family caregiver in small groups visit with a docent at the Phoenix Art Museum, or a musician at the Phoenix Symphony, or someone at the Scottsdale Center for Contemporary Arts, and it's extended to other programs. They'd get some information. The person from the arts program wouldn't know who the patient or family caregiver was. We'd have some activity that would play to the strengths of the patients, and the testimonials we would get about how much it meant to the family caregiver were really something. What was interesting about that program is that our arts partners, it was a different part of the portfolio of what they did for a living, and they wanted to own those programs. And I just love that. And the more we have programs like that, you see other programs in the community, like the Dementia Friendlies community, in a couple of communities like Tempe and now in Surprise. And these are big deals, and we're going to have to advance that, and we will have an opportunity to do so. You mentioned the particular challenges during the pandemic. This has been a very, very tough time for all of us, but it's particularly tough for patients and families with dementia. And as you know, my dad, who just passed away just as he was getting close to 94, had to be hospitalized due to a medical problem and had a bit of dementia. So he goes into the hospital, and people are there in masks with no visitors, and they're more likely to develop delirium, this confusional state which can be frightening, exhausting, and dangerous. And the idea of how to engage individuals, whether in the hospital or not, during this time when they're more isolated, has been a bit of a challenge. The silver lining, if there are silver linings when it comes to healthcare, is I think the healthcare profession has learned to make better use of telehealth, communicating by phone or over the computer, in ways that will have a lasting benefit for those families who don't necessarily need to get a loved one dressed to come in down the road. And we've worked on my colleagues have worked on other engagement strategies that have been more virtual up to now. That said, we're looking forward to the time where it's sufficiently safe to be able to move together more in person. And we have more opportunities to meet in person with the safety precautions and increasing vaccination that hopefully will continue to rule the day going forward.
Well, first, let me just say this. I'm saddened to hear that your dad's passing.
Thanks.
And I know that he was an incredible individual. He was a physician like you, and led a great life. But it's so hard during COVID not to being able to see him and be with your loved one at the end of life. And I know how hard that must have been for you. And so hard for so many that are listening in right now. And the scars are going to be there for a long time.
I know both personally and professionally so many families who struggle with illnesses like this. And the family caregivers, so many of them are heroic in what they do and handle issues with such grace and courage. But why should someone have to be a hero to cope with this? Everybody should be able to cope with this. And we need to be able to address that in more effective ways. I think we'll have some opportunities here within the next 3 years, which maybe we can discuss a little bit later, to extend that model. I'm excited about where things are headed from both a clinical and research perspective.
No, we're coming up on almost halftime, so I don't want to get things started way too fast right now and not be able to finish them. But COVID has really opened our eyes to a lot of things. And you talked about telemedicine, and I'm just thinking, as we close this segment, support groups is something that's been really big. And you talked about Jan and creating the arts program. Have you been able to keep those going?
There are our colleagues have done a really good job with remote communications, being able to have those that support virtually. And there are other programs like that that I just think are really helpful for families to either get tips from others in the same experience or just knowing they're not alone as they're going through this. What people have a misconception about is that because we don't have treatments to slow the progression just yet, that there's nothing you can do about it. And there are so many things one can do to improve the quality of life for patients and family caregivers. We need to just find ways to get people that kind of information and the resources to help them.
You talked about dementia-friendly Tempe, and I know there are a lot of other cities like Scottsdale that's becoming dementia-friendly. We also have these memory cafes, too, which is great outlets for these caregivers. You've been listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Dr. Eric Reiman here. We're at halftime. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You, and if you're just tuning in, we're in our second segment here, or second half, should I say, and I am pleased to have Dr. Eric Reiman here in the studio. He is the Executive Director of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. He's the CEO of Banner Research, and he's also the Director of the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. If you missed the first half, you can catch it up on our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button, third button down is radio show. You can catch that first half and about 400 others that we've been bringing to you for the last 8 years. So in the first half, we talked a lot about Banner Alzheimer's. We talked a lot about dementia and the differences between Alzheimer's and dementia. We talked about support groups. We talked about what COVID has done to diagnosing people and also getting support for families. We delved a little bit into the care support that is being done at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute with the partnership with some of the arts, which is really fascinating here. And in this second half, I really want to spend some time talking about research and some of the work that you are doing, Dr. Reiman, and some of your colleagues are doing. And certainly it is exciting stuff. I remember, I think it was Jeffrey Bean Foundation referred to you as a rock star. So you are somewhat of a rock star in this space, and would love to learn a little bit about what you're doing. Having served on the board of directors, you and your colleagues have identified a group out of Medellin, Colombia, and I'd love for you maybe to start with that.
Sure. And
then talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing as it relates to the research.
Thanks, Bob. Well, for many years, we have been particularly passionate about what we could do to find an effective Alzheimer's prevention therapy as soon as possible. What we had argued for quite a few years was that even if we had an effective prevention therapy today, it would take too many healthy volunteers and too many years to conduct a clinical trial to show that a smaller number of people on treatment would go on to develop symptoms than those who were getting a placebo. So we developed some experimental paradigms and measurements to be able to accelerate that. We made the case to the world, actually, that it would be feasible to conduct potentially license-enabling prevention trials faster than one might think, by studying people who, based on their genetic background or these emerging biological measurements of Alzheimer's disease, but were healthy, to include them in trials and see if these treatments worked. We had for many years here in Arizona been studying people with 2, 1, or no copies of the ApoE4 gene, the major genetic risk factor for developing Alzheimer's at an older age. Individuals with 2 copies of this gene have a higher risk, but not a certain risk of developing Alzheimer's. And we showed that we could detect and track these changes in the brain more than 2 decades before the onset of symptoms. So we proposed these prevention trials, and the first prevention trial we decided to pursue was not in people with 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene, but in a remarkable group of individuals who carry a rare misspelling of a gene, which caused them with a near certainty to develop Alzheimer's symptoms in their mid-40s. If you have the gene, you're going to get it. You have a 1. If your parent has the gene, you have a 1 in 2 chance of getting the gene. And there are about 500 to 1,000 extended families that have one of these genes. So the question would be, if we were going to do a prevention therapy, where would we find enough people to include in a trial like this? And this took us to Medellin, Colombia. My colleagues Pierre Theriault, Jessica Langbaum, and I reached out to our colleagues from Colombia who were following the world's largest extended family, all descended from an ancestor who carried this gene. Think of your largest family reunion you can imagine.
Wow.
And now think of this effort that, with our support, our colleagues in Colombia have traced back to a common ancestor from the 1600s, 6,000 members of this family, 1,200 of whom have a mutation that's going to cause them to develop cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's at the average age of 44. You meet these families and you're reminded of the urgency we all have to try to address a problem. And we've been working with them since 2010. We launched the first NIH-supported prevention trial. It's got a lot of interest over the years, including a lot of articles and books, 60 Minutes reports. And we were launching new territory so that we've been evaluating a treatment that targets a protein called amyloid in the brain. Our thinking was that if we could start these treatments before people had symptoms, they would have an even better chance to have a beneficial effect and a profound impact. And this study is set to conclude in the middle of 2022. So we hope to have a readout from that study. In the meantime, we continue to find other ways to work with our collaborators there to detect the earliest brain changes with different biological measurements, brain imaging techniques, spinal fluid measurements, and increasingly and excitingly blood tests for Alzheimer's. And it's been a joy. When we think of our urgency to address this problem, we think of family members like that. And I think of all the wonderful volunteers we've had over the years, both here in Arizona and in Colombia and around the world, to advance our goals. We have other international prevention trials through our Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative, which Banner Alzheimer's Institute leads. And we wouldn't be able to do any of this without all those wonderful volunteers and all our terrific collaborators.
Truly remarkable that this family does exist with this gene mutation. And I would imagine as a scientist, it's like a kid being in a candy store. I mean, just seeing that you're able to maybe get more information and be able to find that, not cure, but way to prevent Alzheimer's.
Yep. And
my hat's off to you. I know you've made a lot of trips down to Colombia.
Yep.
And your colleagues are working very hard on that. And I'm hopeful. I can't believe that it's already going to be mid-2022 that you'll have some results.
We're excited about that. That first study opened the door to prevention trials. So they're through our Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative and 2 other groups, primarily in partnership with the NIH and industry, makers of the most promising treatments. You'll see a growing number of these prevention trials. And we have reason to be cautiously optimistic that one of these prevention therapies will work. Our hope is that we will find one that will be beneficial to a very large segment of the population, the 25% of unimpaired older adults who already have biological evidence of Alzheimer's in their brain, and maybe find a prevention therapy that works and make it available within 5 years. A fighting chance to do just that.
Well, what's interesting, and I learned this from you, is that the changes that happen long before the amyloid plaque and the tau show up. And that's really, which I think you and your research scientists have discovered, is that once those amyloid plaques are there and the taus are there, it's already too late.
It may be late to have the most profound effect, but we've seen some recent developments with amyloid plaque reducing antibody therapies. The one that's gotten the most attention lately from Biogen, aducanumab, which is being considered for approval by FDA in June. Some of these treatments have been suggested to slow down the progression of symptoms in people who have a condition, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's or full-fledged dementia due to Alzheimer's. Maybe slow down these changes by about a third. In this particular study with aducanumab, unfortunately, there was an interim analysis in the middle of a study to see if they were on the right track. And they concluded prematurely that the treatment wasn't working and discontinued it, only to go back a few months later when more data came in to say, we made a mistake. Not only did it seem to have an effect, we think it had a sufficient effect to try to get it approved. So you have to typically do 2 trials to get approval. One of the trials had some very convincing effects. The other one didn't. There may be some explanations for that. And now FDA is grappling with what will ultimately be a Solomonic decision about whether they could find a way to make a drug approval with that suggestive but not quite as compelling evidence, or have to wait a long time to do that second study again. So we'll be very interested to see how that works out. And there have been some suggestive benefits from some other amyloid plaque reducing treatments that suggest that targeting that protein may be helpful, and it might be even more helpful before the onset of symptoms. And we'll see, fortunately, a more diversified portfolio of new treatments as well. It's a very exciting time. Just to put this in context, there's been a lot of progress in Alzheimer's over the last few years, but the glaring exception to all the progress since 2002 have been these clinical trials. Over 99% of these trials, time-consuming, expensive trials, have failed to work. We're beginning to see some changes. We have this possibility with aducanumab. There's another treatment called pimavanserin that's being used for all forms of dementia for psychotic symptoms that had some encouraging results and is being considered for approval that would be helpful to family members. And we have other treatments in the hopper. In the future, I'm excited, in addition to drug therapies or lifestyle interventions for prevention, and future gene therapies, some of which we will have the opportunity to put to the test sooner than one thinks. So it's an exciting time for the field, despite the history of failure up until the recent year or two.
Well, even with the failures, I've learned from you that we learn. We learn from the failures, and we are able to chalk up whatever we've learned and move on.
Right.
I do want to talk about, in the last segment, I want to talk about healthy lifestyle, eating, and exercise, and how they may play a role in longevity and prevention.
Good.
You've been listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Dr. Eric Reiman here in the studio. We were talking about research and care for Alzheimer's. He is the executive director of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute and the CEO of Banner Research, and also the director of the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. 3 down, 1 more to go. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Dr. Eric Reiman here in the studio. He's with the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. A little Marshall Tucker band. Thank you very much, James. I appreciate that. What a great way to get into a weekend. Dr. Reiman is very involved in so many different aspects of Alzheimer's research. And I've shared this with our audience, you are the director of the Alzheimer's, or should I say Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I know you're doing some work right now with our legislators, so I would love for you to tell us about the work and about what's going on legislatively.
Thank you, Bob. From day one, I've been so keenly aware of all the things I don't do well, that collaboration is not only just the right thing to do, but it's strategically the right thing to do, to capitalize on complementary strengths to address shared goals together in more effective ways. And for more than 20 years, we've been really privileged to have this Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium with more than 200 researchers from 11 institutions in Arizona. We receive generous support from the state of Arizona, which has been ahead of the rest of the nation when it comes to supporting this fight against Alzheimer's disease, and from each of the participating institutions, and have become known as the destination center in the fight against Alzheimer's disease and the leading model of statewide collaboration. We've played leadership roles in the unusually early detection and tracking of Alzheimer's disease, the scientific understanding of Alzheimer's disease, the evaluation of promising treatments and prevention therapies, the development of brain imaging techniques and evaluation of really promising and exciting blood tests for Alzheimer's disease. We have world leaders in the study of normal brain aging as well. So we really want to leverage those strengths to make a difference. And each of the institutions in this consortium has their particular strengths and interests, but working together, it's turned out to be very successful. So just to think, since 2000, we've had thousands and thousands of publications. We've generated more than $2 billion in new investments. And what we used from the state funding that we've got, thanks to our legislators and the governor's office and our friends at the Department of Health Services, was we were able to launch about 60 new collaborative studies a year, figuring out which ones hit, and then can generate additional NIH grant support after that. And it's just a way to get new initiatives started sooner than one might think, and become a magnet to attract some wonderful researchers and clinicians to Arizona along the way.
You know, I love that the consortium exists. I know you play an active role in that, and I think that the beautiful thing about that is nobody's siloed. It's all shared, and that's the only way we're going to get to this, right? I mean, we have to share information, and we have to do a moonshot, if you would, type, research to be able to find out a way so that we don't lose another generation, that we can delay onset, and hopefully maybe one day just eliminate this awful disease from our race.
One of the competitive advantages we have in Arizona is because we're relatively young and rapidly developing, haven't been there with that critical mass of individuals at any one institution, is we don't have that illusion of self-sufficiency. And increasingly, science is a team sport. So if you can bring together people with different methods and ways to use those methods together, people from different disciplines to address questions, you can do some pretty breathtaking things. And we've had the opportunity to do some truly breathtaking things right here in Arizona.
We can do it together.
Yep.
So we talked about lifestyle. We just have a couple minutes. Lifestyle can play a role in delaying onset. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know diet and exercise are so important, not just for delaying onset for dementia, but all kinds of other things relating to health.
There are a number of lifestyle interventions, diets, some dietary supplements that have been suggested but not yet proven to promote cognitive health in older individuals and possibly delay cognitive decline related to Alzheimer's and other things. And the evidence is quite suggestive for some, but not as definitive as a rigorous prevention trial. And because a lot of these interventions have other health benefits, we recommend them in any case. So we recommend many things that are good for the heart tend to be good for the brain. Aerobic exercise is high on that list. Cognitive exercise and social stimulation is probably a healthy thing as well. There are a number of dietary interventions. The ones that have gotten the most attention have been diets like the Mediterranean diet or Mind diet, with enrichment in fish and green leafy vegetables, olive oil, among other things that have been suggestive in a number of studies to have a benefit. And there are a number of other interventions. For instance, it has been now suggested in actually a rigorous study called the Sprint Mind study, that being more aggressive about managing your blood pressure, your systolic blood pressure, aiming for 120 over 140, might be able to reduce your likelihood of progressing from health, say at the average age of 70, to mild cognitive impairment by nearly a third.
Wow.
So those things are important, and there's more work to be done. What we're going to eventually have in the next, just in the next couple of years, is we're going to have the opportunity to leverage blood tests related to Alzheimer's disease in large-scale ways to go back to some of these older studies and find out if the effects that we have on promoting cognitive health is relevant to Alzheimer's, and that'll be an exciting thing as well.
So glad you brought that up. You know, I gave you a shout out about being a rock star. That was GQ 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Rock star of science. I have Dr. Eric Reiman in the studio here with me. Eric, I've really appreciated having you on. I also want our listeners to know, if you want to learn more, go to banneralz.org. And if you want to make an appointment for a loved one or yourself to go see somebody at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, call 602-839-6900. You also have this registry called NALZNOW, ENDALZNOW.org. Dr. Eric Reiman, thank you for being in the studio with me. Make it a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next Friday.
Thank you.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress Home Care Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.